I've worked for the Bureau for about a year now. I moved to Sydney just under a year ago. Met Office, and when I worked for the Met Office, I worked as a global marine meteorologist. So I did lots of global marine forecasting, commercial forecasting for point forecasts, route forecasts, and area forecasts. Also worked as a offshore marine consultant as well. So I spent 6 lovely seasons in the North Sea, sitting in the fog generally, working on this vessel here. This is the CYCA 7000. So it's one of the second largest crane vessel in the world. And I worked on construction projects in the North Sea. So this is the Ekofisk redevelopment project that I worked on a few years back. It's an overview in this talk that we're going to have tonight. So I'm going to define East Coast lows. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they occur, then how we forecast them and the difficulties that we see in forecasting East Coast lows. I'm going to talk about something called bombing lows that you may or may not have heard about. And then we're going to just have a quick rundown on some severe East Coast lows of the past, starting with the Pasha Bulka storm and the Sydney Hobart. We're going to talk about tropical cyclones, the differences and similarities between them and East Coast lows, and also just the hazards that we see associated with East Coast lows. I'm sure you're well aware of them, but we're just going to have a bit of a refresher on those as well. And then potential changes to the high seas forecast and warning service that the Bureau does, and also a bit of time at the end for a Q&A. And just for those online, we're going to make the slides available at the end, just so you can see those. So what is an East Coast low? Right, it's kind of a simple question and a difficult question all at the same time. I'll just play this little video. So the scientific definition of an East Coast low is just an area of low pressure that forms off the east coast of Australia. But that's a little bit too simplistic. And if you look at different scientific papers, they define it different ways. And that's not always the definition we want to go with, because if you start going with a definition like that, then you've got low pressures that have no impact. You've got low pressures that are out in the Tasman that aren't really affecting anyone apart from vessels way out in the Tasman. It's not really affecting the shipping lanes. It's not affecting the coastal waters. So we have a Bureau definition for East Coast lows, and this is kind of because the public's become quite aware of them. And when we talk about East Coast lows, we're expecting hazards. We're expecting something quite significant. We don't want to call every low pressure system an East Coast low, because we don't want to kind of cry wolf with it. We want to get that message out that this is something hazardous. This is something important that people need to pay attention to. So the Bureau definition, there's a lot of text here, but I'll just kind of go through it quickly. It's a closed low pressure system. It's close to the coast. It stays there for about 12 hours, and there's going to be some significant hazards with that as well. Strong winds, and there's a certain pressure gradient on it as well. It's 4 hectopascals per 100 kilometers, but that doesn't really matter. It's just, it needs a defined pressure gradient, and there's got to be hazards from those strong winds. So that's how we define them at the Bureau. Also the latitudes as well, between 20 and 47. So what do we call these other lows that aren't East Coast lows, but kind of are, but they aren't really? So coastal troughs, you can see on the MSLP pictures here. So coastal trough is an area of low pressure that's not got an enclosed centre. It will spend some time close to the coast. There may be some pretty significant impacts with it, but they're more likely to be around flooding, coastal impacts, potentially strong winds, but not of the magnitude of an East Coast low. Then we've got Tasman lows. So East Coast lows by any other name really, apart from they're not near the coast. Significant low pressure system, but we're not seeing those impacts, particularly for the coastal waters or for the shipping lanes up and down the coast. It's out in the Tasman Sea, so it's a lower impact system. It's not going to have the same hazards associated with it as your classic East Coast low. Transient lows as well. So very similar to an East Coast low, forming the same sort of area, have similar impacts, but on a shorter scale. It doesn't spend so much time close to the coast. So it's going to affect a smaller portion of the coast, and it's not going to have the time to build up those impacts. The wave heights aren't going to build up as much. The wind speeds are going to be focused on a smaller part of the coast as well. So not as much impact. And the reason for that is, you can see it on here, is we don't have, so with an East Coast low, you need a high pressure system running right down from the south of Australia in the Bight out into the Tasman as well, to really focus that area of low pressure on the coast. But with a transient low, it doesn't have it there in the Tasman Sea, and it allows that area of low pressure to form on the coast and then move away. That's why we call it a transient low. Ex-tropical cyclones as well. So ex-tropical cyclones are another low pressure that we see on the East Coast, but it's kind of the remains of a tropical cyclone. Lots of impacts, but it's already got a defined name from it. And they're often going to be named as well. So if it's an ex-tropical cyclone, it will have a defined name anyway. These can form into East Coast lows, but at this stage, it won't be. So then the East Coast Low. This is what we're looking for. This is the sort of typical MSLP pattern for an East Coast Low. So you see that high pressure all around the Bight and into the Tasman Sea, and it really focuses that low pressure on the coast. It doesn't allow it to move away. So it spends some decent time on the coast. It allows those impacts to build up as well. And the other thing that it does there is while it's close to the coast and with that high pressure to the south, you get this strong pressure gradient in its southern quadrant, southwestern quadrant, and it really gives those strong winds with the tightening of the isobars and that pressure gradient there as well. So this is a pressure pattern for your classic East Coast Low. So how do they occur? What are the ingredients we need for these things? So on this video I'm about to show you in a minute, you can see the blue area down to the south here. So that is the cold air that's bounded by the jet stream. And what we need with an East Coast Low is we need a south-north orientated jet stream that moves up over Australia. It will give us two areas of high pressure either side of it, and then it will allow a low pressure to form on the coast of Australia. And it's this jet stream, this air from the jet stream, that's going to create the forcing at the surface that will allow the East Coast Low to develop and develop on the coast as well. So I'll just play this for you. So we see this bulge up, and then it cuts off a little bit of cool air, like cold air in the upper atmosphere. And what this is this air is denser than the surrounding atmosphere, so it exerts force on the surface. And as it moves towards the coast, ahead of it, it makes the air rise. It pushes the air up ahead of it at the surface. So you get this rising air at the surface. It drags in warm air from the north as the pressure drops at the surface. So we start pulling warm air from the north and the pressure starts dropping, and then that warm air is dragged up into the atmosphere, releasing more energy, more heat, and we start getting the low deepening further. I'll play this again because I'll talk a bit more over it as well. But on this, so you've got that warm air dragged in from the north, the upper forcing from what was the remains of the jet. And then we also have cooler air inland, and this is often why we get a lot of these things forming in the cooler months, because we've got a pool of cool air over the continent. That gets dragged out over the sea, and we have this temperature contrast. And temperature contrast is what we're looking for in meteorology. We call them baroclines. When you have a barocline at the surface, you get mixing of different air masses, and these are the things that force mid-latitude areas of low pressure as well. So the cool air undercuts the warm air and forces that warm air up further and faster. So you get further deepening, further warm air dragged in, and the whole thing is kind of a feedback loop, and it allows the low pressure to deepen further and faster. Not only that, I've talked about the high pressure blocking to the south, and also that pressure gradient gives these strong winds on its southwestern quadrant. So that's the ingredients for the East Coast Low. I'll just play that video through another couple of times so you can just watch it, and we see that cool air break off from the jet, we get the surface forcing from the upper air, and then we get all the other warm air dragged in from the north. And we get the cool air dragged off the land, that temperature contrast, and things getting forced further, the low deepens further, drags in more air, and the feedback loop starts. And then we get the high pressure keeping it in place and increasing that pressure gradient and increasing those wind speeds and the wave heights to its southern quadrant. So forecasting these things, and I hope what you've got from that is that there's a number of ingredients. Okay, so we need quite a specific set of variables for an East Coast Low to form. And this is some model data that I was looking at about the time that this talk was proposed. So we're kind of looking at a possibility of an East Coast Low, and I'll take you through the model data and the forecast in a second. It was about a week after the floods we had on the New South Wales coast. So we're quite flat out in the office. We're quite concerned about the potential for an East Coast Low to form as well. And it's about a week later. So this is 4 days out before we could see this potential East Coast Low. And you can see what we've got here. This is the Australian model here, which is based on the UK global model. Then we've got the European model here. These two models are statistically the global best weather models that any agency can use. Then down to the south, we've got the Japanese model, which is a well-respected model for this part of the world. And we've also got the US GFS, which again is a decent model. It's developed by NOAA in the US. This model is free source data. So most of the weather models you get online are based on the US GFS. So most of the free web stuff you'll see will be from the US GFS. And then on the right-hand side, we've got something called spaghetti plots. Okay, you can probably see like it looks like lots of spaghetti, lots of different lines. And what they are, they're ensembles. And ensembles they're all the different permutations of the model. So it gives you an idea of the confidence in the model. So like this is the one thing that it comes out with, but these are the possibilities within that model. This is the European, this is the Australian. So when those lines are thicker and more close together, you've got good confidence in the model, basically. When there's not too much variation in the spaghetti, it doesn't look like a big mess. You've got lots of confidence. So I'll show you what we're looking at. We've got 5 slides of this. I'll just go through them. So you're starting to see an area of low pressure form just off the Queensland coast in most of the models, but it's in a different place, it's a different shape. There's a bit more of a trough than the JMA. There's sort of potential maybe an East Coast low in the USGFS, maybe a trough, maybe a low in the EC, and the Australian one's kind of going for it a bit, but it's maybe more of a Tasman low or offshore low at this stage. And then as we run through the sequence, we can see the Australian model really goes for it. The European model doesn't want to have anything to do with it at all. JMA is somewhere in the middle. The USGFS takes the low off the coast. And I'll just run to the end of the sequence here. And you can see like a significant area of low pressure in the Australian model. But then you come to your spaghetti plot and look at the possibilities. You know, you could have something tropical off the coast of Queensland, or you've got a low down over New Zealand, or maybe something on the coast and everything in between. So you've got very, very, very little confidence in this model at this stage and what's going to happen. And also, while you've got that possibilities and all that in that model, you've got these other models showing different scenarios as well. So the point I'm kind of getting at here is that East Coast lows are very difficult to forecast. There's lots of different solutions at 4 to 7 days knowledge. And what we do in the office in Sydney is we're looking at all these different options, we're looking at reality, we're looking at what's happening in the upper air, and we're kind of trying to evaluate this and see which is the most likely situation. So at this point, you're looking at this 4 days out, there's not much you can do with it, really. You're kind of thinking, all right, there's a possibility for this, but you can't put warnings out. You can't start calling an East Coast low because you just don't have the confidence in it. You don't want to be saying this every time something like this comes up in a model. You want to be much more certain. So generally, with East Coast lows, we're probably down to the 1 or 2 days notice before you're starting to put things out to the media and starting to put things out in the warnings that an East Coast low is going to happen, because you really want that confidence. These things develop right over the coast. So you don't really see anything until a day or 2 out. And that is the difficulties about forecasting these things. So some similarities and differences between tropical cyclones. So everyone knows tropical cyclones are massively hazardous. We're starting to get there with East Coast lows. I'll show you a bit of the differences and the similarities as well. So this is an East Coast low on a satellite image, right? This is a classic sort of pattern for it. It's got this. This is the warm air we saw in the conceptual model created by the cloud band there. It gives the cloud band, it's the rising air. It condenses before all the cloud. And then we've got the cool air coming off the land and undercutting this right around here. So that's the kind of setup you see on a satellite image of an East Coast low. When you go to a tropical cyclone, it's quite a different image. I mean, apart from the latitudes, of course, it's a more circular system. The cloud band is all the way around it and it encompasses the whole area of low pressure. And this is the difference in the way these two things are forced. The East Coast lows are forced by that cold air descending and the warm air rising, the mixing of the two air masses. Tropical cyclones are forced just from the surface. It's a convective system. It forces just from the heating at the surface, moving up through the atmosphere. And once you've got that heat source, as long as you've got that heat source, these things keep going. East Coast lows, on the other hand, they won't last quite as long, because the cool air comes around the top of the low and it will cut off the warm air at the surface after a few days. And it will make that warm air rise into the atmosphere, but then nothing else can happen because there's no more mechanism for it to draw in more warm air. So kind of differences in that way. The latitude, the cold air, warm air, it's an upper feature versus a surface feature. Tropical cyclones are just driven by the surface. East Coast lows are a combination of things, upper air and surface. So the length of time is different as well. As I alluded to, the tropical cyclone will continue to form and continue to run until it runs out of that warm air at the surface. So it depends whether it moves over the land or moves to cooler waters, whereas the East Coast low will get cut off. The pressure drops, though, they can be pretty similar. So you can have the similar sort of pressure drops in an East Coast low to a tropical cyclone, and therefore you can have similar sort of hazards from them as well, similar sort of wind speeds. I'm not going to stand here and say East Coast lows can be as bad as a Cat 5 tropical cyclone. They can't. You don't see wind speeds that strong. But we've had recorded wind speeds up to a Category 2, Category 3 at times, tropical cyclone. So it's a really significant system. You know, a Category 3 cyclone is strong, strong winds. It's something to really be aware of. And East Coast lows can match that for their magnitude as well. As well as that, you see differences in size. So East Coast lows can actually spread over a larger area. You can see a longer fetch of those strong winds. So you can have a larger area affected by gale force or stronger winds, and therefore you can get larger seas with them as well. So, you know, they're not to be trifled with. So I think that covers that. And then I want to talk to you about bombing layers. Has anyone heard about weather bombs or cyclone bombogenesis or bomb cyclones and things? You might have seen these terms in the media. It's kind of a bit of a buzz term in meteorology anyway. You might not have seen it, but the actual term for it is explosive cyclogenesis. And it's about the pressure drop in a certain space of time. So when you see these 24 hectopascals in 24 hours, or a hectopascal an hour, a millibar an hour pressure drop or thereabouts, you're talking about explosive cyclogenesis, something that's deepening rapidly and therefore increasing the wind speeds rapidly and increasing the wave heights rapidly as well. And what does this is it's the really, like we talked about the cold air coming down, you start seeing cold air coming down from the stratosphere. We call it stratospheric intrusion into the low. And that drives down to the surface. Because it's so cold and so dense and so dry, it forces that warm air up so much more rapidly that we get these massive pressure drops in a short space of time. And then you get these really strong and quick increases in the wind speeds. And the most deadly East Coast lows are the ones that display these sort of symptoms, the explosive cyclogenesis. It's not just East Coast lows, but East Coast lows do display these symptoms at times. So it takes us into the famous or infamous or the severe East Coast lows of the past. And these ones are examples of bombing lows or explosive lows. So the Pasha Bolka. And the reason we talk about these is I'm just sort of emphasizing the hazards that we see with those. 9 deaths recorded from the Pasha Bolka storm. It washed up a massive bulk carrier on the beach in Newcastle. I'm sure you're all aware of it, but it just gives you an overview of what these things can cause. Mean wind speeds up to 60 knots and 70 knot plus gusts. So you're talking Category 2, bordering Category 3 tropical cyclone speeds there. Wave heights recorded in Sydney, 6.5 metre sig waves, but 14 metre maximum wave heights recorded on the Sydney Wave Rider with this event. I mean, that's enormous wave heights. $1.5 billion in damage as well. So then we go to the Sydney Hobart. I'm sure you're all aware of the 1998 Sydney Hobart storm. Again, a bombing low, rapidly deepening low, with 6 deaths recorded and multiple rescues from that storm. The Cyclone storm as well, this is the strongest wind speeds we've seen recorded from one of these East Coast lows. And that's gusting into Category 3 tropical cyclone. That was what was recorded at Nobby's on the beach. So offshore, those wind speeds would have been even stronger from that. And it washed the wreck of the Cyclone up onto the beach. And then we go back 150 years or so to the Dunbar storm. So this is the largest maritime death attributed to an East Coast low around on the East Coast. 121 people lost their lives in this storm, as the ship was wrecked on the South Head, Sydney South Head. So then we go to hazards and warnings. So on the left here, we've got an image of the shipping channel, the shipping channel down the east coast of Australia. And also one of the busiest pieces of water around Australia and on the east coast. So like I said, we get these high wind speeds and cyclone wind speeds, and we get them in the southwest and the southern quadrant, moving right up against the coast and coming right across that shipping channel. I'm just putting this up to sort of highlight the hazards of this. It comes straight across it. So everything that's moving north and south is seeing all those winds and those wave heights coming directly across the shipping channel, and the lows literally forming right on top of them. So it's quite hard to get much of a warning about this and much time to react to these sort of systems. So wave heights, this is one of the other massive hazards with East Coast lows as well. So in the Bureau forecast and products, we talk about SIG waves. We have significant waves in there, and that is your average of one of the third highest waves in the spectrum. But as well as the SIG wave, you've got maximum wave to be aware of as well. So when those forecasts go out, you need to be aware that the max wave can be up to double the significant wave height as well. So it's about dealing with both of those. And we see that on the chart on the right. We've got sig waves in the 3 meters, max waves peaking over 6 meters. And like I said, with the Pasha-Bolka storm as well, 6.5 meter sig waves and 14 meter maximum wave heights. The East Australian current adds another element into it as well as providing energy for the East Coast lows to form with the heating. You get wind and wave moving against those currents as well. So you can emphasize the wave heights even further by moving straight into the current. With the current directions like that, imagine the wind and wave coming in from the south or the east, moves against those currents. And this is the kind of situation where you can start seeing rogue waves and something even more hazardous than the maximum wave heights that we see recorded on the wave buoys. So I've put this slide up to sort of highlight behaviour of shipping around tropical cyclones and the warning service we provide around tropical cyclones. So you've got the cone of uncertainty, where the tropical cyclone is likely to move. You can see TC, severe TC markers, 48 hours from intersecting the main Australia-Asia shipping route. And all the red dots are the ships' recorded positions that we had on this image. And you can see 48 hours later, all those ships move out of the way of that tropical cyclone. So 2 factors. I kind of want to talk to you in the Q&A a bit about how we could maybe encourage this sort of behaviour around East Coast lows, and also emphasise the point that tropical cyclones, you know, you can see it forming and then you've got this cone of uncertainty where it's going to move, but an East Coast low, it's going to form right over that shipping route. So there's less time to react to it and it'll be right on top of you. But you could be there 24 hours before and you're not seeing a lot, and then 24 hours later, you've got a significant area of low pressure and a sudden increase in those wind speeds. So this is the hazards and warnings that we've got from the Bureau. These are the products that we provide our message through at the moment. I won't read them all, but basically, I'm sure you're aware of a number of them. They're available on bom.gov.au/marine, and they're broadcast out on satellite and high frequency radios and things. So that's what we've got currently. That's what's available now, and this is where our messaging will be available. The proposed warning enhancement is going to be something that we'd like to do with the high seas forecast. So these are the following statements that we're proposing to highlight the risk of East Coast lows to shipping. We'd love to get a bit of feedback on this and see what you think. It's kind of an impact and an action statement. So the impact, trying to emphasize how serious a weather event this is going to be, and then the proposed action that would be recommended to take in this sort of situation, particularly for mariners that aren't aware of East Coast lows. You might have foreign crews and things. So it'd be great to get a bit of feedback on this.